So this is a part of a series on PTSD and how to overcome PTSD. And we have many video teaching on this subject. So if you want to look at more of these videos, go to veteransfreefromptsd.org and you can see a list of the videos, the video teaching that we have there. We've been ministering to Christians and other people who deal with suicidal thoughts, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, PTSD, and so forth. And one of the conclusions we've come to over the years is that one of the main needs is to replace hopelessness with hope. And as a Christian, the New Testament and the words of Jesus, if you look at them, they're clearly full of hope. So that's what we're going to look at here. We're going to talk about, through the whole training here, we're going to talk about replacing hopelessness with hope. Because one of the things we've seen that's common, a common thread throughout all these issues, is that a person that have gone through some of these problems, the problem, a lot of times they have a real hopelessness. They deal with hopelessness. So you want to come at this from a place of real hope. And there's no question, the words of Jesus can bring real hope. And we have ministered to Christians with with depression, panic attacks, anxiety, and so forth. And we have witnessed them overcome and get completely set free from these oppressions. So anybody listen to me here, this will bring you hope. And the people overcame by trusting in the words and promises of Jesus. Now obviously, this is for Christians. We're going to come at this from a little different perspective, maybe some things you haven't heard before or maybe you haven't seen it before. But trusting in the words and promises from Jesus will, first of all, it will bring you hope, and that hope will get you to a place where you can completely be free from these oppressions. And we've seen this. That's why we're doing this. So let's just take a couple of examples here. We'll go into this in detail as we go along, but let's take a couple of examples. I have come to set the captives free. So Jesus is saying this. He's saying he's come to set the captives free. And listen, I had to deal with a fear issue in my life for years, and I prayed and prayed, but nothing was happening until I really came to realize that Jesus had come to set me free. And you know, it seemed like he was challenging me. If I've come to set you free, why don't you believe that to me? And see, that's the key to this whole thing. When you come to Jesus, and again, this might be from a different perspective, but this perspective works and it will bring you hope. And it's not taught much in the church. It is taught, but it's not taught that much. I came to the realization that, again, Colossians 1:13, Jesus had come he said, you've been translated out of the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of his son, in Colossians 1:13. And when I realized that it was already done, the finished work had set me free, that was the main turning point. And I'm convinced that that's why people get set free. Because when you look to Jesus and you see the finished work, you believe in him, you're a Christian, and you see that this is already done, that he has come to set you free. And he's saying the truth will set you free. I've come that you might have abundant life. I've overcome the world, and in me you will also. You understand that he came to set the captives free, and I was a captive. I had a fear issue in my life that was I couldn't sleep at night, and it was horrible. It was a torment. And when I realized that Jesus had already done this, he had already set me free. And again, I did pray to God to set me free from this thing, but I realized in the New Testament that's not how it works. In the New Testament, I have to submit to God, resist the devil, resist the enemy, and they'll flee. The fear was an oppression. And once I realized that oppression was not from heaven, and that Jesus had already set me free from that, once I had that thought in my head that I was already set free, that what I had to do was fight this thing, and that Jesus had already said, I have come to set you free, I've come to give you abundant life. And as soon as I realized that, and it didn't happen overnight, and this will not probably happen overnight for you, but it made a major change in the way, as a Christian, the way I perceive things. And that major change really did set me free. Over a certain amount of time, I think it was 3 or 4 months, I became into a situation where I was completely free from that oppression. And that was from believing in the words of Jesus and trusting in his finished work. And the Bible says that God is no respecter of man. If he'll do it for me, he'll do it for anybody. So this is the beginning of the teaching of hope to replace hopelessness. And we'll come back to some of these things we talked about here again. But the next part of the teaching will be on spiritual understanding. Okay, so we move along to spiritual understanding. And again, this can be difficult for people. This is kind of, on this journey here, we know how people, when we talk to Christians and minister to Christians, we have a good idea how they react after a while. And this can be difficult. And this process can be difficult. I mean, this is a bit of a difficult fight. Let nobody tell you this is easy. Anybody that's come out of this stuff, and we have some good testimonies on our websites, but anybody you talk to, if you talk to somebody about what happened to them, they'll tell you it was a difficult process. But one of the first things you've got to get a hold of is a spiritual understanding. And for a Christian, this should not be difficult. 1 Corinthians 2:14, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they're spiritually discerned. So if you're not a Christian, again, it's easy to become a Christian, and just email me and I'll send you some literature, and that's easy to be a Christian. You just trust and believe in Jesus. So email me at my email address up there, and I can send you some information. But if you're a Christian, then you will understand these things. If you're not a Christian, you won't. It's just that's what it says here. The natural man can't understand the things from the Spirit of God. The natural man can't. So if you become a Christian, then you're not a natural man. You're born of God. So you can understand these things. But the spiritual, and Paul goes on to talk about in Colossians 1:9, he talks about spiritual understanding. And if you read that Colossians 1:9, which I suggest you read some of these scriptures to get a revelation of it yourself. But Paul talks about it, it's essential. The spiritual understanding is essential. Paul says that in Colossians 1:9. And without the spiritual understanding, it makes the whole process, it makes hope difficult. And that's what we're going after first here, is hope. We're going to get you to a place of hope. And there is hope in the words of Jesus. There is lots of hope in the words of Jesus. And then, you've probably been through some of these places. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. I mean, a lot of Christians I talk to don't understand this. They say, I've been crying out to God for years and nothing seems to be happening. And yes, this is the hope. This is what it's talking about here. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. But hope is gladness to the righteous. Hope first, then the finished work guarantees the victory. See, that's the key. And that's some of the things that you have to understand spiritually. The spiritual understanding part is that Jesus has already done this. And once you get to that point that he has set you free, that brings hope that yes, if he has done this for me, I understand that now. Instead of crying out to him and begging him and pleading with him, which isn't a bad thing to do, but it's immature based on what the New Testament tells us. Because the New Testament clearly tells us that this is a finished work. It's done. He's defeated the enemy. And again, the enemy hears the two voices in your head sometimes. The very negative stuff is usually from hell, and the very positive stuff is from heaven. Now, people have a difficult time with that, and that's why spiritual understanding is the key. And again, we're not against psychiatry. That works for people. Anything that helps from the world is good. But if you're coming to God and you get the spiritual understanding here, you really get a hold of what's going on, what's happening. And that's the important thing, is to understand spiritually what's happening to me. Again, and realizing what this oppression's all about and how it works. And then when you understand from a spiritual perspective, and again, without the spiritual perspective here, it's difficult. It makes it difficult. Because if you think it's all in the natural, all in the flesh, then how do you battle that? We are convinced, and as a Christian, it shouldn't be difficult for you to understand this, because you've been taught this already, that a lot of these things are spiritual. And once you see that, once you see the spiritual aspects, and that's what we'll explain here, how these spiritual things work. We're going to go on to talk about some of these things. You'll see it clearly. It's not that difficult to see if you're a Christian. If you're not a Christian, however, it'll be difficult for you to see. So, but when you see that from a spiritual perspective and you understand what's happening spiritually, then you connect the words of Jesus Christ to that, because Jesus, again, is talking to us in the spiritual realm. This is a spiritual battle. And it's called, a lot of times Christians call it spiritual warfare. I don't use that term because it's overused sometimes, and people get kind of carried away with what that is all about. But if you're suffering from any of these things, suicidal thoughts, depression, PTSD, anxiety attack, you know you're in a spiritual battle. And what we're doing here and why people have come out of this is because they looked at it from the spiritual, they got some spiritual understanding, they realized what's happening, and then they connect this to the words of Jesus, and they connect it to the finished work, and all of a sudden things begin to change. The Word of God says clearly, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. That is such a saying from God. And God has these great one-liners that are packed with truth. And again, they're in the spiritual realm. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So when you begin to think in your heart, you begin to believe in the words of Jesus, you understand spiritually what's going on. It's amazing what kind of changes can take place. Just amazing.